Hello, I'll start again. My name's Tracey Robbins. I head up the UK outreach programme for Eden Project. So Eden Project Communities works in all 4 nations. And I'm going to sort of share a presentation with you around sort of loneliness and connection and my approach. So prior to joining Eden, I used to work for the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and we did some action research around neighbourhood approaches to loneliness. I've always done, I'm youth and community qualified, I've always done community work and worked in that space. But ever since doing that research, which I think was about 2011 now, showing my age, I've had a really keen interest in loneliness. And one of the reasons I moved to the Eden Project is because I wanted to be not exploring the issues of loneliness, but doing something to help people live with loneliness or reduce sense of loneliness and raise awareness of what loneliness is. So I'm going to share a presentation with you. It is a bit wordy, but I will chat. And by all means, you know, you can minimize the presentation or have us the same size. I will send that presentation to Joe as well, so you can have it later if you wish. So just bear with me while I set up my lovely screen, because I didn't do that beforehand like I was meant to. So just move that. Thank you. Are we sharing?
It's just coming on, yeah.
Lovely. It does go a little bit slow when I share. So, as I said, I work for Eden Communities, which is the UK outreach programme for Eden Project down in Cornwall, which some of you may be aware of. I like to think we're probably Eden Project's best kept secret, because not many people know that we actually work in all 4 nations across the place. So, whereas Eden's mission is about reconnecting people with humankind. So we want to connect people not just with each other, but to nature. And we strongly believe in the power of transformation. So bringing art, nature, communities together to explore how we can work together for a better future. So all that we do is around sort of human connection, sustainability and resilience. At Eden Communities, we want to make sure we have a world full of happier and healthier communities where people know each other. And that's the key thing, because it's through knowing each other that our neighbourhoods thrive. I really work on the neighbourhood approach to most things. So that's what I'll be talking about today. I really believe that our connection with each other and with nature is a vital part of building our physical, mental and social health. So it's a big rounded picture. And we need people. So we are praised on our independence, but actually we know more than ever that we're actually an interdependent species and we need other people, we need human connection. And I think it's key to building that hopeful future, to building social capital, social change. And it's human connection that is the most important thing in order to have resilient people, that we can face together those environmental, social, political and emotional challenges we all have. And we have seen that greatly this year. I'm not moving on. So what exactly is loneliness? So for me, most of you will probably already know this, but I always think it's really important to revisit this. So loneliness is a mismatch of the relationships we have and those we want. More importantly, it is our internal trigger to tell us that we need to seek company. So if we are thirsty, that is our body telling us we need to drink, because that's what sustains us and keeps us alive. If we're hungry, that's our body telling us that we need to eat, because that's what sustains us and keeps us alive. And it's the same with loneliness. It is our internal trigger that tells us we need to seek other company. We need company in order to survive. And people think of loneliness as being alone, or loneliness and social isolation as being one thing. They're very, very different things. Loneliness is not just about being alone. And there's that lovely quote that says, loneliness describes the pain of being alone, where solitude describes the joy of being alone. And I think there's nothing more true about that. And social isolation is a very, very different thing. So you could be well connected and have lots of people around you, but still feel lonely because you've got that mismatch of the relationships you have and those you want. Isolation is where there's often no choice but to be alone. And whereas many of us may seek solitude, very few of us would seek to be lonely, because it genuinely is not good for us. It's really bad for our health. And I think it's really important to revisit loneliness and to think about that mismatch and that human trigger, and then start thinking about some of the language we use around it. So for those who know me, the word tackle gets my heckles going and everybody talks about tackling loneliness. It's a headline grabber. It sensationalizes it. It makes loneliness a problem. I believe loneliness is an experience, a bit like love. People don't tackle love. They don't tackle things like that. If loneliness is a human response, like being thirsty, then it needs a human response. It's okay to be lonely. It is okay to experience loneliness as we would experience pain, experience joy, experience sadness. It's not something to be tackled, and you can't tackle loneliness. You could maybe reduce it. You could alleviate it, reduce the impact of it. You could live with it. Very few people talk about loneliness as that artistic space and a healing space. I think the biggest issue around loneliness is if you get mired in it. Often loneliness for most people is transient, and they have the relationships in place that keep them buoyed. It's when you experience loneliness for a long period of time and you start losing the skills to communicate and mistrusting other people that it becomes a real issue for that person. But it's still an experience that they need sorting and addressing. Also, we often hear about people who work with loneliness by helping the lonely or reaching out to the lonely. Lonely people are not victims. They don't need saving. They are ordinary people, as we all are. And people who reach out to people who are lonely are also not heroes. They are human beings. And I think we have to be really mindful of the language we use, because if we're going to reduce the stigma of loneliness, then we have to make it normal and everyday. I don't want to be fretful about talking about my loneliness in case you suddenly feel it's your responsibility to rescue me. I don't want to feel that, and I don't think many other people will. And we really have to beware about not othering people. So within society, whenever we create a group, we create an us. But by the very nature of creating an us, we create a them. And that's really tricky. I mean, I've been doing community work for many years now, and how we can make sure groups are truly inclusive and settings are truly inclusive, and that there's a really nice sense there without things becoming cliquey or staid is really, really tricky. And we often see this with younger people and older people. All of a sudden, people are put into these great big homogenous groups where their personality, their individuality, their personal experience are just all washed aside, and they're now an older person. I've recently turned 50. Oh, I can now join Open Age. I'm an older person. It's me you're talking about. And I think some things I will still have a personal experience. Fortunately, at my age, my loneliness probably comes from not being close to my grandchildren. And there are specific causes of loneliness that do come with older age. But then there are also the same that come with younger age. So we must be careful when we're looking at loneliness, not to group people together and assume that we're all experiencing the same thing, because we're not. And people will be lonely regardless of age or experience, because it's about life transitions and we might experience them at different times. We also have to try and avoid that deserving and undeserving loneliness. And again, we see this with groups of people. So there is, older people are seen as the deserving lonely, and you often see a picture of an older person on their own, and that is something that we all need to address. And maybe younger people aren't seen as or don't raise the emotions in other people as much about their experience of loneliness. And it's the same. I get a bit passionate about everybody talking about loneliness at Christmas, and it's a bit like homeless people at Christmas. Loneliness happens all year round, and there's a deserving and an undeserving nature of it. And actually, for some people, it's the community transitions that are greater impact. So there's been some research that might indicate that actually people feel lonelier in August when people are on holiday, or they can see people having a wonderful time and they're not invited, or students may leave, or the normal patterns go. And it's the same for September when children go to school, and all those transition times are really quite a trigger for people who are vulnerable to loneliness. So we must try and remember that it's a personal experience, and we mustn't try to assume just because someone lives there or just because someone's a certain group that that their experience of loneliness will be the same. But what we mustn't forget is loneliness is really, really serious. And I know the top line here, loneliness kills people and communities. And there's a lot of research that shows that. So if we think, if I am feeling lonely, I'm often feeling frustrated, maybe unwanted, misunderstood. I'll be feeling that nobody loves me, or not the right people love me, and that I'm really, really not part of where I am in. I'm disconnected. That means that I will, my sense of self-preservation will kick in, because I will feel sort of slightly disconnected from everybody else. And this will affect my hormones. This will make me have that fight and flight response quite hard. If I'm feeling unwanted and unloved, I'm going to stop caring for myself as well. I'm not going to, whenever you're sad, you don't go for a healthy jog and have a salad. Well, you might, but I don't. I'll go for a nice tipple and a nice big bar of chocolate. And when we add all these things together, so loneliness will increase your sense of dementia, increases hypertension, cardiovascular disorder, reduces sleep patterns, sends your hormones upside down. People are more likely to drink, overeat or undereat. They're more likely to smoke if they're lonely. And it's a combination of all these things that really, really is detrimental to health, and people are more likely to die prematurely because of loneliness. And the same is the impact on our communities. So if I become lonely and withdrawn and stop caring about myself and feel that others don't care about me, I will withdraw from my community. And therefore that community loses me as a connection, as an asset. And you only need a few people withdrawn, and they're like breakers. And it's really hard to bring that together. So loneliness severely damages our communities as well as people. And often people are fearful of connection because of regulation. And again, regulation can kill kindness and reduce action. So people are fearful of knocking on their neighbour's door. And they are fearful for reaching out to people without a DBS check or without it being a formalised relationship. Nobody DBS checks me to check in on my neighbour. And this is why I like to look at things from a place perspective. And I think it does reduce action. So people are fearful of reaching out and connecting up. I was in a service station and a baby had fallen over a couple of years ago, and nobody went to pick that child up because I think they were scared of actually reaching up and picking that child up. So I did, crying child trying to find its parents. But people are fearful of how they will be portrayed or what people might think. So it reduces our action. Also, our fear ourselves of having to then solve someone's loneliness also reduces us from asking or addressing it. And yet we don't have to solve anybody's loneliness. We just have to talk to it and be there. And we have to remember that actually lonely people are vulnerable people. And that is why we do need to safeguard each other. And that is why we do need to connect. And particularly older people who are reaching out for that connection and conversation and those relationships, we all know that that is open to mistrust. And same with vulnerable adults or young people coming up. I believe, as I said before, that human connection and community confidence is what builds resilience and reduces loneliness. And our communities and our neighbours need permission and reasons to come together and connect. And I think now more than ever, the stepping stones to support and engagement need to be put back in place. That connection with others. For those who arrived a little bit early, we were talking about a lot of us have lost some self-esteem, have lost social cues, have lost confidence, skills with communicating out there, and fearful and fretful. And we need to be looking at actually how can we address this within ourselves, but with others as well. So I've always looked at it from a neighbourhood approach. So I think of loneliness of anybody of any age, but living in a place. So if you start to sort of look at loneliness in older people, loneliness in carers, loneliness in homeless people, loneliness in young people, you suddenly take them out of the context with which they live. And actually, it's those connections that may help. So as a person, I might have really good friends and close relationships with my family who live in Leeds. I'm in Carlisle. Modern technology, WhatsApp, Zoom, everything. I can communicate with them. But actually, I don't see them every day. And if I was to become ill or isolated or to have a crisis, it's the people around me that I will turn to and I will need. So it's about looking at actually how, looking at a place perspective, we can look at loneliness. And again, with social isolation, maybe not so much nowadays, but it will come back. Someone might be isolated, and therefore you will take them from them home and provide transport for them to go to an activity, a lunch club, some bowls, some tennis, a yoga class, where they may have a really nice time, and then you will take them home. You may have reduced that person's social isolation because they've had that contact for that week, but actually you might have increased their sense of loneliness because they've just been reminded of what they don't have where they live, that they don't have those connections. So that hyper local activity, I think, is really, really useful for combating loneliness, but also for looking at things around access and issues that people can go. I also think people think that you have to do a deep and meaningful action to reduce someone's loneliness, but actually any communication and every contact counts. And it's just about being there, listening and saying hello. So raising your head. Really difficult with masks on nowadays to smile. So I tend to say hello and how are you, and not just smile, but a smile and letting someone know that you've seen them that day might be enough just to keep them going. And that's what it's about. It's like, how do we help people keep going so they don't get mired by their experience of loneliness? Again, the stigma around loneliness, we have done absolutely loads in the last decade to really bring the issue of loneliness to the fore. I'm really hoping with the pandemic that one of the outcomes of this will be that actually, sadly, many people will have experienced loneliness, so they may have more empathy about those people who deal with the issue longer term. It's really an ordinary feeling to be feeling lonely. Nobody is a burden. Nobody is a nuisance. And also, as we get older, we've got to reduce this expectation. Well, you're older, of course you're going to be lonely, and this acceptance like, well, at my age, what do you expect? I'm lonely. No, there's no reason that the more we think like that, the more we will accept that position ourselves, but also we will project that onto others. And I think we really have to reduce that expectation or that acceptance of being lonely as well. And as I said, think of reasons for people to connect, but stay connected. So again, if I talk to my friends and I talk to them every sort of 3 or 6 months and just pick up the phone, have a really nice chat, that's lovely. But if they were to ask me how I was feeling, I'd probably lie and go, oh yeah, everything's lovely, it's fine, it's all this, that and the other. If I had consistent and continuous contact with that person, they would know more detail about my life, and I would feel much more able to say, actually, I'm really struggling at the moment, or I'm having a bad time. And it's right at the beginning of those conversations that might prevent loneliness becoming too deep, because you're able to share your experience with somebody else. And I think what, again, has been useful with the pandemic is that people have been able to refocus on themselves and prioritize themselves and that time to connect. And there's been a real outpouring of being kind. Not everybody's experience, but I think if we can try capture that and try make that the norm, count, I think that would be really kind. But as we come out of the pandemic, we've already seen an us and them being sort of created with younger people and old people, mask wearers and non-mask wearers, and I fear that my hopes of the connection and the kindness continuing might soon dissipate. What does happen is we get permission and time, and I've mentioned this quite a few times. In the loneliness field, you often hear the phrase, the permission of snow. So snow gives us permission to stop. Nobody's expecting us to get anywhere. But it also gives us permission to help each other. So we might go help someone to push their car. We might clear the snow away from the paths. We might make someone a cuppa for clearing the snow away from the paths. But also what the snow, where there are no footprints, you can see who has not been visited. So you're more likely to go and check if that person needs some milk or some sugar, or if they've got everything they need to help the person down the street with the buggy. And it makes it sort of puts it in your face, so it makes it really visible. And what we do at Eden Communities is the big lunch every year. And for us, that is a positive way of trying to give people permission to connect and carve out a bit of time in the year that people come together over food, create friendships and have fun. And we have seen on average about 4 million people feel that their loneliness has been reduced by getting to know their neighbours at that event. So that is what we sort of try to do on this scale. What we've seen this year is a long time. So what coronavirus has given us is months and months of permission to be at home and time to connect and refocus on ourselves. But in a way, it might have tipped the other way. So we did some polls late 2020, and what it has done, because although it's given us permission as time, it's actually reduced our connection with others, and therefore reducing our confidence and reducing our skills. So we've seen over 23 million people really face mental health issues in lockdown. People feel that it's had a real negative effect on their mental health. It's really made people notice their vulnerability and that we are fragile. And we are fragile human beings. We are not invincible, independent machines. But also, people have gone for a long time without face-to-face conversations with other people outside of their household. Now, quite a lot of us working in this field will know lots of older people that do that normally and without a pandemic. So there's a lot more people with that shared experience. And how do we tap into that, and how can we support that? But I worry about what has happened as well. So I also worry about people who come in and
Apologies. I think the internet has gone down for Tracey, so I'm sure she'll rejoin us quite soon if you just bear with us. Thank you.
hello, I'm so sorry I got kicked out. To what stage could you hear me?
That's fine. If you put your slide up, the last slide up, you can probably tell you. Sorry.
How long have I been gone?
Only not very long at all, actually. No worries.
How I don't know what's wrong with my internet today. It's usually very reliable. I do apologize. Maybe it's telling me I'm talking too long. So I think
No worries. It happens to all of us. So we've
at least the dog's not barking. So I was on this slide.
That's right. Yes. So you're on the top sentence. Yeah. About
lovely. Right. So I was thinking about those people who experienced loneliness before COVID-19 and still feel lonely, and maybe now more angry and resentful because of the hype around communities coming together and people being there for each other. And if that's not been that person's experience, then that could be really, really challenging for them. But also those people who have become lonely during this time. So often when we were doing loneliness before, we used to have the active lonely, and they were often older people who would go to lots and lots of groups, and they'd be really, really busy, but still experience loneliness. And actually for those people, they've not been able to be busy, and they've lost some of that connection. They might, for some, been able to create it where they live and do other things, but for some, it's been really detrimental during this time. So there's been a real change in what people can do and quite a lot of isolation. But if we also think about uncelebrated birthdays, people losing their job, and all those sort of life transitions and the impact on our well-being. And of course, those people are bereft. So what we have is a lot of people there not just who have been affected by family members who have died during the pandemic, but all those other ordinary deaths and lives that have passed during this time, and people who have been unable to say farewell to them or have proper funerals, and there'll be all that complicated grief going on. And I think there'll be quite a long time of recovery, and people may experience bouts of loneliness during this time. And on the sort of opposite side of that, there's what about those people who've become connected? So I was talking to someone the other day who have had a lovely experience during COVID, has felt like they've got their community back. People are working from home. They see people. They've seen children. People ask how they are. And they're actually really worried that they will become lonely again and left behind when the world starts to move forward, and that they will become distant again. So they've had a taste of that sense of community, and they're fretful that they will lose that and become lonely again. And also, there's also those people who don't want the world to go on. There's people who found this a really restorative time for themselves and their well-being. And have we thought about those people in this sort of not new world, but the new context with which we're living and working? And of course, there is now the virtual world. There always has been, but even more. And I just wanted to touch on this. There's been an assumption that older people don't want to be online. And I'm an older person. I'm online. And some don't, but actually some are really happy with it. And it's connected people to opportunities, conversations, and experiences they wouldn't have been able to have. What we still need is that human invitation of people getting engaged in anything. It's that human invitation that is the one single thing that helps people get involved in anything, whether it be online or in the virtual or in the real world. However, as we get older, we are more fretful about making mistakes with new technology or when we're online. Just because of the way our senses go, we're often going to press the most obvious button, which might mean we press leave when we don't want to. And also we may become frustrated and give up sooner when things don't work. So we've got to think about, actually, how do we make this easier, that we keep people who are aging better connected and able to use the virtual world, that I assume will go on in some sort of way. And I often hear people talking about a blended experience or a blended model. And I just want to put a plug out there that be it physical, so there's a lot of people who do want to come back together in the physical world and rejoin activities. And there's a lot of people that really love the online world. And tell you one, I wish my Slimming World Club had stayed online. It'd been better for me and my waistline, because I can never get to it. But I think what's really important is, especially in the world of loneliness, is that we don't try to combine them together. So it is no fun when you're already feeling slightly disconnected and maybe lonely to be zoomed into a meeting, an event, an exercise class that's happening with people there. That will just compound your sense of being an outsider, and that you're missing all that communication, you're missing all the banter, you're missing the smells, the scents, the atmosphere. So this is just a plea from me to either keep it online or physical world and not try and merge the two together, because I think there'll be added complications with that. So I'd like you all just think a little about, those people we care for. Who are they? Might they be experiencing loneliness? Who are we worried about? Have we mentioned we're worried about? As I said before, we are often fretful of raising the conversation in case we then have to solve it. I give you permission now not to solve it. But yeah, so I'm remembering that there's no silver bullet to loneliness. It is personal and subjective experience. But I do believe we can all make a difference. And I do believe that because we care, or you wouldn't be here, and because we're kind, because we're part of the humankind. And anyone can be lonely, even busy people, and that includes you. But anyone can reduce loneliness, and their own or another's. So we need to think about how we look after ourselves, the health and well-being of ourselves, our communities and our colleagues. Work is a huge community. How we can give that gift of time or keep hold of that time when we lead such busy lives. But also, how do we stay connected to our families and friends? And who are our anchors? So during the pandemic, I have two friends that were in the picture earlier, Jane and Susan. And we decided that we would talk every week. Every week we would talk about how we were feeling, what we were doing, and what we could do next week to keep going. These were my anchors. You know, I think the Campaign to End Loneliness quite a while ago did a thing about safeguarding your convoy. There's something about looking for people who can be your tribe, who can be your anchors, who can be your convoy. As we get older, we not that we stop making new friends, but we think we've got plenty of friends. But actually, as we get older, so do they. And we might lose some friends and they move away. And you are never too old to try and make new connections and new friends. So really think about actually, who are my anchors that I need and how will I get through this? Who's going to get me through my loneliness? And some of them might be professional people and some of them might be more informal friendships and connections you've got. But mainly to value yourself and get people who are experiencing loneliness to value themselves and prioritize themselves and look after themselves and prioritize their relationships and do things that sustain them and make them happy, even if it's one thing a day that makes them happy or brings them joy, to try and encourage people to do that so they've got that light. And above all, to remember it's personal. So my experience of loneliness has changed throughout my age, from being a bullied, fat, chubby ginger kid to being a teenage mum on a council estate, to being someone who experienced domestic violence and bulimia, to moving house. I think that was one of my biggest, after all those things, it was actually moving from somewhere where I was well known and setting the community to a new place that really did tip me over and experience loneliness. So the loss of my parents, and now the fact that my grandchildren are far away. My experience is very, very personal to me and of all those ages. And that's what we have to remember. The only way we're going to understand someone's experience of loneliness is by talking to them and creating an environment that they are able to share their experience. So I think that's it from me now. I've got a few more resources on the last slide that might be able to help. I mean, they're getting on a bit now, but just for some extra reading. So I'm sorry you lost me halfway through there. And it does mean that I've lost all the chat. So I don't know if you asked any questions, but I'd be more than happy to answer any questions if you're not tired of hearing my voice already.
Well, thank you so much, Tracey. That was a brilliant talk, I have to say, very thought-provoking. So thank you. So if anybody has any questions, if you could put it into the chat, that would be great. We do have one there that says, is there a definitive correlation between older people with health problems suffering more loneliness than more active people? Also, in the case of older people aged 80 plus, where many of them, their siblings and family members and friends have sadly passed away.
I think, again, with the caveat that it's personal, but you can pull some things together. So when we look at the factors that contribute to people's loneliness, some of them are sort of internal, and some of them are very much the physical world, and some of them are experiential. But if I struggled to get access anywhere and I didn't feel well, and I might have a long-term health condition, that does impact on people's experience and could impact on their sense of loneliness. For some people, they might find support groups around their illness and actually get a new support network. But if you struggle with your health, I think it is a watch point for people who have health problems. So one of my neighbours is quite ill and has kept getting something else after something else after something else. And I got them a dog, actually. It really helped. But I really make sure I go over and I spend that time, because I know that although she's in a couple, she's at risk of getting lonely because of that outside connection. And I think the 80-something is really interesting. I worked in residential care for a little while, the Joseph Roundtree Housing Trust, and it was very interesting when people talk about activity coordinators and what people used to do. And they said that when they first moved into the home, they had lots of stuff going on, but they were in their 60s and 70s, and they'd do it all. Do you know, now they're in their 80s and 90s, they were tired and would have liked someone else to do it for them. Do you know, so it wasn't that they didn't want to connect. It was just like they didn't want to be the one to organise it and make the first move, because they'd sort of done that. And if you think about your life, there'll be certain things like going, oh yeah, I've done that, you know, and you move on. So I think there's something about the older age group that we really do need to think more carefully about, because it is much harder to create new and meaningful relationships for those people. So the key is to try and think about what it is they're lonely for. And if it's siblings and loss, then it's bereavement we have to go through, and helping people do that, and it's more therapeutic work. If it's a place or memories or hobbies, I mean, people cannot just be loneliness for people, if you know what I mean, not experience it just about people. So it is about what is it. You might not ever reduce that person's loneliness. And I think that's an exception, especially if they've lost someone. So I am lonely. I've lost my mum and my dad, my mum more recently. That's a mismatch. It's never coming back now. And I will have, they're often fleeting moments of loneliness and regret and sadness. And I think in those instances, it's like, how can you bring some positive experience and the joy in people's lives in order that they have a lovely time, or that they work on it in an artistic or therapeutic way, because you can't bring someone back, you know. So yeah, it's really it's complex, I think, as we get older.
Absolutely, I totally agree. We've just got a comment here which you might want to address. It says your comments regarding the use of language and needing permission and reasons to connect are fascinating. Interestingly, I've heard the term epidemic of loneliness, which is the classic medicalising of the issue.
Yeah, and to be honest, people didn't take loneliness serious until it was medicalised. So until, and it's old hat and don't ever use it, but until people started saying it's as detrimental to your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, or you're twice as likely to die prematurely if you're lonely, people did not pay attention to it, you know. But actually, it's not a health condition. It creates maybe negative health. It impacts on your health, but it's an experience. So if we think of the opposite of lonely, which is actually intimacy, but it's that being with people who know you and you don't have to worry. If you're in a intimate, close relationship, you're more likely to be well, you know, and you're more likely to be confident, and you're more likely to do things and make changes and face things. And it's the same for when you're feeling healthy. You're more likely to do the behaviors that keep you healthy. And it's that sort of thing. But it is an experience. And that's why I say, even if you can't solve someone's loneliness, which I don't think you can actually give them other experiences that might bring some joy back into their lives, you know, and then you hope that joy and those positive experiences will help them start behaving in a positive way. And then, you know, those stepping stones to building back relationships will help.
Very good response. There's just one other comment there that says, is it time to move away from the term befriending as a response to loneliness?
I think befriending to me is one end of a spectrum, I suppose. So I'm very much in the beginning end, those informal networks, supporting networks. Let's try prevent it ever happening, or making sure you've got those support networks and anchors in place if it does. But I think befriending is a safety net. And for some people, without befriending, they have absolutely nothing. So if I'm talking about that little spark of joy and that little bit of something, and there's nothing, I used to do advocacy work, and this is why I think it's really important around this place thing. There's nothing more sad as a human being that someone is paid to be in your life. Okay, so the only people you've got in your life is people paid to be there. At least with befriending, people have volunteered to be there, you know, but actually it's better to have someone who's volunteered to be there and who you can have a connection with than nobody. So it's a real safety net, I think. And people have moved to phone befriending and different things. So yeah, I don't know about the term and the language, but yeah, friendship is a key thing.
Okay, thank you, Tracey. There are some questions in the Q&A as well.
There are.
So one is, I wonder what your views are of organising befriending schemes, which you just answered, which is great, thank you. It's been a great talk on loneliness. You mentioned that you are not keen on blended approaches. Do you mean some people in the room and some on Zoom? Could you elaborate?
Yeah. Well, and again, this is partly a personal experience, but also sort of anecdotal feedback I've got. So I've always done outreach work. I head up a UK outreach team. So before everybody else was on Zoom, I'd probably be the only person zoomed into a meeting or an event. And it was awful. You know, when you do your emails and, you know, everybody'd come in with a cup of teas and the chatter, and you were permanently on the outside. And actually, it was much more challenging being zoomed into a meeting than being in the meeting. When everybody moved on Zoom, it was so much nicer, besides having to look at yourself. But actually, everybody was in the same boat. And I think there's definitely been some research around Zoom etiquette that if one person's online, everybody should be, and at their own desks. So it brings that parity to everybody of the same experience. So I think it's slightly different like this, I suppose. So if you do a webinar and you're recording it and you might share the recording later, then you're still part of the audience. But if it was a conversation or if it was a event, I think it's more important that either everybody's involved or nobody is. It's just because if you can imagine, I don't know what sort of event you were thinking of, but if you can imagine, I don't know, a cooking demonstration where you've actually got some people in the room doing the cooking, but you're filming it and zooming it out to other people who are in their homes, you know, in order to do that, then they're going to miss being in that room and they're going to feel like they're on the outside or they're getting a second class version of what's going on. Do you know what I mean? So I think if you want to reach people who are unable to come to a physical event, then just put it online and do the cooking demonstration online for everybody, so that everybody is the same. Because it is, as someone's just said, a great connector. But I think it could also be a great disconnector if there's only one or two people not in the room and people are in the room. I hope that explained it a bit better.
Yeah, that was a very good explanation. Thank you. Okay, so we do have let's have a look at the questions. Do you have these in your... So, hello, Tim from Visit Banbury.
Hello, Tim.
I can absolutely concur the permission point, as having done the big lunch multiple times in our street in Banbury, the excuse of holding a street party, enabling a group of neighbours to go door to door, speaking to other people, speaking to people they did not know, has been transformational in my street. We started in 2009, and now, sorry, I have to keep moving the screen down. We started in 2009, and now people buy houses in our street because of the community connections. That's fantastic.
It's amazing, isn't it? When I moved to this village, I used to live in Bradford, so a really, really busy place, and I moved to a village. And I thought they won't want anything like a big lunch because it's a small village. So that's my assumptions, that everybody knows each other. They know of each other, but there's nowhere for anyone to come together in this village. So when I made a couple of friends, and then we organised a big lunch. And honestly, it's that thing about being the younger, older person, I suppose, in the village, that they used to do it. But as they'd get older, they'd run out of, the children had left home, or they'd run out of reasons to come together. And one of the neighbours said to me and his wife, "Who's that?" And she went ballistic. And she's like, "That's Janice. She's lived here 19 years like us." Because they didn't see each other, and because there's no place to connect, they knew who lived in the village, but they never came together. So it was actually that coming together, and we did it twice before the pandemic hit. And I think it really, really helped the village rally. And now there's like a Drumbuff ladies group on sort of chat, and we go into, different people, let people know when there's different events going on, and saving my big lunch this year till after lockdown restrictions is lifted, as a way for those people who have become quite housebound, I suppose, whether that's mentally or physically, and have lost some of those skills, know what it is, and it's actually a safe space to come back out and reconnect, and sort of I suppose a pilot for when they start going out to other things. So yeah.
Brilliant. Sounds great. I'm going to do one in our street, I think. So Margaret says it could be as a result of not being able to contact with others that some people will find it hard to re-socialise. It could be frightening to have to now be expected to socialise, to talk to people. A friend I saw last week said after a short time of being away from home, I just like to be back in the surroundings I have been safe in.
I think that is a huge problem. Was that Margaret? So again, my friend that's on the picture, Susan, is now really fretful about leaving home. And she used to always go away with her friends and on short holidays and whatnot. And there is this sense of, we got told for over a year, home is a safe place. Stay home, stay safe. That has become ingrained. There really is extra work to do. There's so much to do. She has, and even myself went to London for the first time last week. I was exhausted when I came back. I really found it hard to work in the office because, and I used to love the buzz of the office, and I think we're so quickly institutionalized as human beings. We're so easily, it's a wonderful way of our adaptability and flexibility. We can adapt to new situations, but then coming back out, it's really intimidating. And I know a lot of people are intimidating about going out, and especially with the vagueness of the situation and cases still rising, and and knowing what's safe. I think it's really, really difficult. So I think that will be a common problem.
Yeah, certainly we were talking about that just before the talk started. So Zoom, sorry, let me just go down a little bit further. Zoom has been a great connector for people who would have otherwise been isolated.
Definitely.
A few messages here.
For me too. I mean,
Yeah.
I do community work, and if it hadn't have been for chats and conversations and seeing people, I don't know what I'd have done. I think I'd have been really, really lonely.
Yeah, same here. Perhaps organisations might want to organise some physical events and some online events, allowing people to participate from across the country, world for the online ones in the future after the pandemic, rather than try to have a blended online physical experience.
I think we're going to do both. So we used to do residentials down at Eden, where we'd take people who wanted to make a positive change where they live to Eden and have a residential. And now we've took that sort of course online. But going forward, we'll probably have both, because actually, as you say, for some people, being online has been hugely beneficial. People with childcare, carers needs, access, they can fit it in. We're actually schlepping to the other end of the country, and being away from home for 4 days is really difficult, and people are not always able to do that. So I think we will see a world where both will live. I think there'll sort of be not a backlash, but I think people will go away from Zoom or on screen stuff as soon as they do feel comfortable in the physical world. But then I think it'll come back and it'll probably even itself out.
Absolutely. Okay, so there's quite a few messages here. I don't know if you're able to read them, but just one more maybe before we wrap up. It's been said that the pandemic has been a cultural trauma, and that recovery from trauma is likely to take longer and be more challenging for those who have experienced previous trauma, especially earlier in life.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And a lot of research actually say a lot of younger people are now experiencing more loneliness than older people. But I think the factors are very, very different. And I think there's a huge job to do around recovery. And I just think, I don't know whether people have ever seen a cartoon that had the pandemic and a little bubble saying, please wash your hands. And then there was the tidal wave saying COVID-19. And then there was another one saying the recession. And then there was another one saying the environment. And I think I don't think people will be given the healing time and the recovery time they need before another trauma like a recession may hit, or some other thing. So, yeah, I'm hoping, and I also worry that people set off to do what they can measure instead of setting off to do what needs to be done, and a lot of work in that preventative space needs to happen at the same time as a lot of work needs to be done in that recovery space. So you get this real, there's the urgent and the important, so the prevention is really important, but the recovery is really urgent, and people go for the urgent, and that means we're constantly reacting. So we need to try find space for that prevention as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Okay, well, thank you so much, Tracey. That's been a really fascinating talk. And thank you to everybody who's joined.
Yep.
And we'll say goodbye at this point. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely. My favourite subject.
Thank you, Tracey.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.